In a quiet corner of the rural South where sprawling fields stretched as far as the eye could see, and life moved at the pace of the setting sun, there lived a man named Marcus. He was a black farmer in his late 40s, with calloused hands, and a heart full of dreams that had long been battered by hardship. His farm, once vibrant with rows of corn and soybeans, now lay barren, its soil depleted after years of drought and neglect. Marcus worked tirelessly every day, but no matter how hard he tried, the land refused to yield enough to sustain him or pay off the mounting debts he owed to Mr. Thompson, the wealthiest and most ruthless landowner in the county. Marcus lived alone in a small, weathered farmhouse on the edge of his property. His wife had passed away years ago, leaving behind an ache that never truly healed, and his children had moved to the city in search of better opportunities. The loneliness gnawed at him, but he found solace in the rhythm of his work, waking before dawn, tending to his animals, and trying to coax life out of stubborn earth. Despite his struggles, Marcus carried himself with quiet dignity, always greeting neighbors with a nod and a smile, even when he didn't have much to smile about. One particularly bleak evening, as Marcus sat at his rickety wooden table sipping weak coffee, there came a knock at the door. It startled him. Visitors were rare these days. Rising slowly, he opened the door to find none other than Mr. Thompson standing on his porch. Tall and imposing, with a sharp suit that seemed out of place amidst the dirt and dust of the countryside, Mr. Thompson exuded an air of authority that made Marcus instinctively tense. Over the years, their interactions had been purely transactional: loans, equipment rentals, and terse conversations about overdue payments. So why was Mr. Thompson here now? "Marcus," Mr. Thompson began, his tone clipped but not unkind. "I need your help with something." Marcus frowned, suspicion creeping into his mind. "Help? With what?" Mr. Thompson hesitated for a moment, glancing around as if checking for eavesdroppers. "There's a situation," he said finally. "A woman has passed away, and I need someone discreet to handle the burial. You're trustworthy, and you know how to keep things quiet." Marcus blinked, taken aback. "A burial?" he repeated, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Why me? Don't you have people for that kind of thing?" "This isn't the kind of job I can trust just anyone with," Mr. Thompson replied, his gaze steady. "It's sensitive, personal, and I'll pay you well for it, enough to cover those debts you've been worrying about." The mention of money hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. He thought of the bills piling up on his kitchen counter, the bank notices threatening foreclosure, and the endless nights spent staring at the ceiling wondering how he'd survive another month. Still, the idea of burying a stranger felt wrong, almost sinister. There was something about the way Mr. Thompson spoke, too calm, too deliberate, that set off alarm bells in Marcus's head. But desperation clouded his judgment, and after a long pause, he nodded reluctantly. "All right," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'll do it." The next morning, Marcus followed Mr. Thompson's instructions to a remote spot deep in the woods behind his property. The path was overgrown, forcing Marcus to hack through thick vines and brambles with a machete. By the time he reached the clearing, sweat dripped from his brow, and his shirt clung to his back. In the center of the clearing stood a simple wooden coffin, draped with a faded cloth. The sight sent a shiver down Marcus's spine. He had attended funerals before, but this felt different, eerie, almost unnatural. Taking a deep breath, Marcus approached the coffin. He reminded himself of the money waiting for him, the relief it would bring to his desperate situation. Setting aside his unease, he picked up the shovel leaning against a nearby tree and began digging. Each thrust of the blade into the hard ground echoed through the stillness of the forest, the sound jarring against the chirping of birds and rustling leaves. As the hole grew deeper, Marcus's thoughts wandered. Who was this woman? How had she died? Why was she being buried here, far from any cemetery or church? Finally, the grave was ready. Wiping sweat from his face, Marcus turned to the coffin. For a brief moment he hesitated, his hand hovering over the lid. Then, steeling himself, he grasped the edge and lifted it open. What he saw inside froze him in place. Lying in the coffin was a woman, her skin pale and her lips slightly parted, but instead of the peaceful expression Marcus expected, her eyes suddenly snapped open wide with terror. A gasp escaped her lips as she struggled to breathe, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Marcus stumbled backward, nearly dropping the shovel. His heart raced and his mind screamed in confusion. Dead people didn't wake up. This wasn't possible. For several seconds, neither of them moved. The woman stared at him, her eyes pleading, while Marcus stood rooted to the spot, unsure of what to do. Finally, she managed to croak out a single sentence. "Please, don't bury me." Her voice shattered whatever remained of Marcus's composure. Dropping the shovel, he rushed to her side, helping her sit up. She was frail, her body trembling as if every movement required immense effort. Her clothes were torn and bruises marred her arms. Something about her appearance, the fear in her eyes, the raw desperation in her voice, told Marcus that this wasn't just some bizarre accident. This woman hadn't died naturally. Someone had put her in that coffin, alive. "What happened to you?" Marcus asked, his voice shaking. "Who did this?" The woman shook her head weakly, unable to answer immediately. Instead, she clutched at his arm, her grip surprisingly strong despite her condition. "Not here," she whispered. "We can't talk here. Please take me somewhere safe." Realization dawned on Marcus. Whatever nightmare this woman had endured, it wasn't over yet. And somehow, fate had placed him at the center of it. Swallowing his fear, he helped her out of the coffin and supported her as they made their way back toward his farmhouse. Every step felt heavier than the last, not because of the physical weight of carrying her, but because of the burden of knowing that his life, and hers, would never be the same again. As Marcus trudged through the dense forest with the mysterious woman leaning heavily on his arm, his mind raced faster than his feet. Who was she? Why had someone tried to bury her alive? And most importantly, what role did Mr. Thompson play in all of this? The questions swirled in his head like a storm, but he forced himself to focus on one thing: getting her to safety. The woman, whose name he still didn't know, was weak and barely able to walk, so Marcus practically carried her the entire way. Her breathing was shallow, and every few steps she would stop to catch her breath, clutching at his shoulder as if afraid she might collapse. By the time they reached the edge of the woods, the sun had begun its descent, casting long shadows across the fields. Marcus glanced back toward the clearing where he'd found her, half expecting to see someone following them. But the forest remained eerily silent, save for the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. Still, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He quickened his pace, determined to get her inside his farmhouse before anyone or anything could find them. When they finally arrived, Marcus gently lowered the woman onto an old wooden chair by the kitchen table. She looked around the room, her wide eyes taking in the peeling wallpaper, the mismatched furniture, and the faint smell of damp wood. Despite the modest surroundings, she seemed relieved to be indoors, away from the oppressive silence of the forest. Marcus fetched a glass of water and handed it to her, watching as she sipped it slowly, her hands trembling. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse and barely audible. "You saved my life." Marcus nodded, though his expression remained troubled. "Who are you?" he asked cautiously. "And why were you in that coffin?" The woman hesitated, glancing toward the door as if expecting someone to burst in at any moment. Then, after a deep breath, she began to speak. "My name is Evelyn," she said softly. "I used to work for Mr. Thompson." At the mention of his name, Marcus's stomach tightened. "What happened between you two?" he pressed, his tone gentle but firm. Evelyn's gaze dropped to the floor, and for a moment, she seemed lost in thought. When she spoke again, her words came out haltingly, as if each syllable carried a weight too heavy to bear. "I worked as a housekeeper for him," she explained. "But about 6 months ago I started noticing things. Strange things. Late-night meetings, suspicious phone calls, documents hidden in places they shouldn't be. At first I thought it was none of my business, but then..." She paused, her voice breaking. Then I found something I wasn't supposed to see. Marcus leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. What did you find? Evelyn hesitated again, her fingers nervously twisting the hem of her torn shirt. Ledgers, she said finally. Detailed records of illegal activities, bribes, stolen, land deals, even threats against people who crossed him. I didn't understand everything, but I knew it was dangerous. I tried to leave, to distance myself, but he wouldn't let me go. He said if I ever told anyone, I'd regret it. Her voice cracked and tears welled up in her eyes. Marcus felt a pang of sympathy, but also a growing sense of dread. This wasn't just some petty crime. This was something far bigger and far more sinister. So what happened next? He asked quietly. He drugged me, Evelyn replied, her voice barely above a whisper. One night, after dinner, I woke up in the coffin. I don't remember much after that, only the suffocating darkness and the sound of dirt being shoveled over me. I thought I was going to die. She shuddered, wrapping her arms around herself as if trying to ward off the memory. Marcus sat back in his chair, his mind reeling. Everything Evelyn had said painted a chilling picture of Mr. Thompson, not just as a greedy landlord, but as a ruthless criminal willing to do whatever it took to protect his secrets. For years, Marcus had suspected that Mr. Thompson operated outside the law, but he'd never imagined the extent of his corruption. Now, faced with undeniable proof, Marcus felt a mix of anger and fear. Anger at the injustice of it all, and fear for what might happen if Mr. Thompson discovered that Evelyn was still alive. We need to call the police, Marcus said firmly, rising to his feet. This isn't something we can handle alone. But Evelyn grabbed his wrist, stopping him in his tracks. No, she exclaimed, her voice rising in panic. You don't understand. If we go to the police, he'll know immediately. He has connections everywhere, cops, judges, politicians. They'll either ignore us or turn us over to him. We won't stand a chance. Marcus stared at her, torn between logic and instinct. Part of him wanted to believe that the system would work, that justice would prevail. But another part of him, a deeper, more cynical part, knew she was right. In their small town, power often trumped morality, and Mr. Thompson wielded enough influence to crush anyone who dared challenge him. Still, doing nothing wasn't an option either. They needed a plan, something smart and careful that wouldn't put them directly in harm's way. What do you suggest then? Marcus asked, sitting back down. We can't just sit here and wait for him to find us. Evelyn thought for a moment, her brow furrowed in concentration. There's someone I trust, she said finally. A journalist friend of mine who lives in the city. She's been investigating corruption in rural areas for years. If anyone can expose Mr. Thompson, it's her, but we have to be careful. Really careful. We can't contact her directly. He might intercept our communication. Marcus nodded slowly, piecing together the fragments of a risky yet plausible strategy. Okay, he said. First, we need evidence, something concrete that proves everything you've told me. Without that, no one will believe us. Evelyn agreed, her eyes lighting up with a flicker of hope. The ledgers, she said. They're still at his house. If we can get them, we'll have everything we need. The idea of breaking into Mr. Thompson's property sent a jolt of fear through Marcus, but he pushed it aside. He had already come this far. Turning back now wasn't an option. All right, he said, his voice steady despite the knot forming in his stomach. I'll go tonight while everyone's asleep. You stay here and rest. Once I have the ledgers, we'll figure out how to reach your friend. Evelyn nodded gratefully, though worry lingered in her expression. Be careful, she said. If he catches you. He won't, Marcus interrupted, forcing a confident smile. I promise. As the hours ticked by, Marcus prepared for the task ahead. He packed a flashlight, gloves, and a small backpack to carry any documents he might find. The adrenaline, coursing through his veins, kept him alert, but it also made sleep impossible. Every creak of the old farmhouse sounded like footsteps, every shadow like a lurking figure. By midnight, he was ready. Slipping out the door, Marcus moved quickly and quietly, sticking to the shadows as he made his way toward Mr. Thompson's estate. The mansion loomed in the distance, its windows dark except for a faint glow coming from one corner. Marcus's heart pounded as he approached, scanning the area for signs of movement. The last thing he needed was to run into a security guard, or, worse, Mr. Thompson himself. Reaching the side door, Marcus pulled out a pocket knife and carefully pried it open. The hinges squeaked slightly, making him freeze for a moment, but no alarms went off. Taking a deep breath, he stepped inside, closing the door behind him. The interior was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that felt almost alive, as if the walls themselves were watching him. Guided by the beam of his flashlight, Marcus crept through the halls, searching for the study where Evelyn had said the ledgers were kept. After what felt like an eternity, he found it. A large oak desk surrounded by bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes. His hands trembled as he opened the drawers, rifling through papers until he stumbled upon a locked compartment. Cursing under his breath, Marcus tried to pick the lock using his knife, sweat dripping down his face. Finally, with a soft click, the drawer sprang open. Inside were stacks of documents, neatly organized and labeled. Marcus flipped through them quickly, his stomach sinking as he realized the scope of Mr. Thompson's crimes. Land theft, bribery, blackmail. It was all there, written in black and white. Grabbing as many files as he could fit into his backpack, Marcus closed the drawer and slipped out of the room, his senses on high alert. The return journey was even more nerve-wracking than the entry. Every step felt louder, every shadow darker. But somehow Marcus managed to make it back to his farmhouse without incident. When he walked through the door, Evelyn was waiting for him, her face lighting up with relief when she saw the bulging backpack. "You got them," she said, her voice filled with awe. Marcus nodded, setting the bag on the table. "Now comes the hard part," he said, exhaustion creeping into his voice. "Getting this information to your friend." Together they devised a plan to smuggle the documents out of town, using coded messages and trusted intermediaries to ensure their safety. It was a risky gamble, but both knew they had no other choice. As dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Marcus felt a strange mix of fear and determination. Whatever happened next, he vowed to see it through. For Evelyn, for himself, and for everyone else who had suffered under Mr. Thompson's tyranny. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the cracks in Marcus's farmhouse walls, casting long streaks of gold across the worn wooden floor. Exhausted but wired with adrenaline, Marcus and Evelyn sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by piles of documents they had spread out like pieces of a puzzle. Each ledger, receipt, and handwritten note painted a picture of Mr. Thompson's dark empire, an intricate web of deceit, greed, and exploitation that stretched far beyond their small town. As Marcus flipped through the pages, his anger simmered, just beneath the surface. He thought of all the farmers who had lost their land to Mr. Thompson, all the families driven into poverty because of his schemes. And now here was proof that could finally bring him down. Evelyn watched Marcus intently, her expression a mixture of gratitude and guilt. "You didn't have to do this," she said softly, breaking the silence. "You risked everything for me." Marcus looked up from the papers, meeting her gaze. His face was lined with fatigue, but his eyes burned with resolve. "It's not just about you," he replied. "This is bigger than us. If we don't stop him, he'll keep doing this. To you, to me, to anyone who gets in his way. This isn't just your fight anymore. It's mine too." Evelyn nodded slowly, though her hands trembled as she picked up one of the ledgers. She knew Marcus was right, but the weight of what they were attempting pressed heavily on her shoulders. Exposing Mr. Thompson wouldn't be easy. It would require precision, patience, and more courage than either of them had ever imagined needing. Still, there was no turning back now. They had come too far to give up. Their plan was simple yet risky. Evelyn had mentioned her journalist friend Sarah, who lived in the city and specialized in uncovering corruption in rural areas. But contacting her directly was out of the question. It was too dangerous. Instead, they decided to enlist the help of a trusted intermediary, Pastor James, an elderly preacher from a nearby church who had known Marcus since childhood. Pastor James was well respected in the community, and while he didn't own much, his moral authority carried significant weight. More importantly, he despised injustice and had often spoken out against Mr. Thompson's exploitative practices, albeit cautiously. That afternoon, Marcus borrowed a neighbor's old pickup truck and drove to the church, careful to avoid any roads near Mr. Thompson's property. The journey felt interminable, each bump in the road jolting his already frayed nerves. When he arrived, Pastor James was sitting on the steps of the modest brick building, reading a Bible. The sight of the pastor's calm demeanor brought a measure of comfort to Marcus, even as his heart continued to race. "Marcus!" Pastor James exclaimed, rising to greet him. "What brings you here? Is everything all right?" Marcus hesitated, glancing around to ensure they were alone before speaking. "Pastor, I need your help," he began, his voice low but urgent. Something big has happened. Something dangerous." Intrigued, Pastor James gestured for Marcus to follow him inside the church. Once seated in the cool, dimly lit sanctuary, Marcus recounted everything. Finding Evelyn in the coffin, learning about Mr. Thompson's crimes, and retrieving the incriminating documents. He showed the pastor some of the ledgers, explaining how they detailed years of illegal activities. Pastor James listened silently, his brow furrowing deeper with each revelation. When Marcus finished, the pastor sighed deeply, shaking his head. "I always suspected Mr. Thompson was corrupt," he said, his voice heavy with sadness. "But I never imagined it went this far. You're putting yourself in grave danger, son." "I know," Marcus admitted, "but I can't let him win. Not this time." Pastor James studied him for a moment, then nodded resolutely. "If you trust this woman, and if you believe these documents are genuine, I'll do whatever I can to help. Tell me what you need." Relieved, Marcus explained their plan. Pastor James would contact Sarah, the journalist, using a coded message sent through a secure email account the pastor rarely used. To protect everyone involved, they agreed, not to mention names or specific details in the message itself. Instead, the pastor would simply write that he had information regarding serious wrongdoing in the area and request a meeting in a neutral location outside of town. Once Sarah arrived, Evelyn would personally hand over the evidence and explain her story. With Pastor James on board, Marcus returned home feeling a glimmer of hope. Back at the farmhouse, Evelyn was pacing nervously, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. When Marcus walked in, she stopped abruptly, her eyes searching his face for answers. "Did he agree?" she asked anxiously. "He did," Marcus replied, setting the backpack containing the documents on the table. "He'll reach out to Sarah tomorrow. After that, it's just a matter of waiting." Waiting turned out to be harder than either of them anticipated. Days stretched into a tense limbo, during which neither dared leave the house for fear of being spotted. Marcus spent most of his time tending to chores close to home, keeping one ear tuned for unusual sounds. Evelyn, meanwhile, alternated between poring over the documents and staring out the window, her mind consumed with worry. What if Mr. Thompson found out? What if someone intercepted the message? What if Sarah refused to help? To distract themselves, they talked late into the nights, sharing stories of their lives before fate had thrown them together. Marcus spoke of his late wife, Clara, whose laughter still echoed in the corners of the farmhouse, and of his children, who called less and less as life in the city pulled them further away. Evelyn shared memories of her childhood in a small, southern town, where she dreamed of becoming a teacher until circumstances forced her into domestic work. Their conversations created a fragile bond between them, a shared understanding born of hardship and resilience. Finally, on the fourth day, Pastor James called. His voice crackled over the phone line, but the news was clear. Sarah had received the message and agreed to meet. She would arrive the following evening at a roadside diner 20 miles outside of town, a safe distance from prying eyes. Both Marcus and Evelyn exhaled in relief, though their anxiety remained palpable. The hardest part was yet to come. The next morning, they packed the documents carefully into a weathered leather satchel, ensuring nothing was left behind. Before leaving, Marcus double-checked that the house appeared undisturbed, hiding the shovel and other tools he'd used in the woods. He couldn't afford to leave any clues that might raise suspicion. As they climbed into the truck, Evelyn clutched the satchel tightly, her knuckles white against the worn leather. The drive to the diner was nerve-wracking. Every car that passed seemed suspicious, every glance in their direction potentially hostile. When they finally pulled into the gravel parking lot, the sight of a young woman with curly brown hair waiting by the entrance brought a wave of relief. That had to be Sarah. As they approached, Sarah smiled warmly, though her sharp eyes betrayed a hint of skepticism. "You must be Evelyn," she said, extending her hand. "And you're Marcus?" They nodded, introductions brief but polite. Without wasting time, they stepped inside the diner, choosing a booth in the corner where they could speak privately. Over steaming cups of coffee, Evelyn recounted her ordeal in full, laying bare every harrowing detail, from discovering the ledgers to waking up in the coffin. Sarah listened intently, jotting notes in a small notebook while occasionally asking clarifying questions. When Evelyn finished, Marcus slid the satchel across the table. "This is everything," he said firmly. "Proof of what he's done. We're counting on you to make sure the world knows." Sarah opened the satchel, scanning the contents quickly. Her expression shifted from curiosity to shock as she realized the magnitude of what she held in her hands. "This is incredible," she breathed, "and incredibly dangerous. Are you sure you want to go public with this? Once it's out there, there's no going back." "We're sure," Evelyn replied without hesitation. "Mr. Thompson needs to pay for what he's done, not just to me, but to everyone else he's hurt." Sarah nodded, closing the satchel and tucking it under the table. "I'll start working on the story immediately, but I need you both to stay safe. Don't tell anyone about this, not even friends or family. If word gets out that you're involved, it won't end well." "We understand," Marcus said, grimly. "Just promise us one thing. Don't let him get away with it." "You have my word," Sarah vowed, her tone unwavering. "Justice will be served." As they parted ways outside the diner, Marcus and Evelyn exchanged a long look. For the first time in days, they allowed themselves a moment of cautious optimism. The battle wasn't over, but they had taken the first step toward victory. Little did they know, however, that the real storm was only beginning. The days following their meeting with Sarah felt like an eternity stretched thin. Marcus and Evelyn returned to the farmhouse, their nerves frayed but their spirits bolstered by the knowledge that someone was finally fighting for them. Still, the weight of what they had set in motion hung over them like a storm cloud threatening to burst. Every creak of the old house, every rustle of leaves outside made them jump. They knew Mr. Thompson wasn't someone who took betrayal lightly, and if he discovered even a hint of their involvement, there would be no mercy. To protect themselves, they decided to lay low. Marcus avoided venturing too far from the property, instead focusing on small tasks around the farm, fixing fences, feeding the chickens, anything to keep his hands busy and his mind distracted. Evelyn stayed indoors most of the time, poring over the remaining copies of the documents they'd kept as backup. She memorized names, dates, and figures, determined to ensure that nothing slipped through the cracks. At night, they sat together by candlelight, whispering plans and rehearsing what they would say if questioned by authorities or confronted by Mr. Thompson himself. Despite their precautions, paranoia gnawed at them relentlessly. One evening, as Marcus stood on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, he spotted headlights in the distance. A car was approaching slowly, its beams cutting through the twilight. His heart raced as he stepped back inside, shutting the door quietly. Behind him, "Someone's coming," he whispered to Evelyn, who immediately grabbed the satchel containing the backup documents and hid it under a loose floorboard beneath the kitchen table. Moments later, there was a sharp knock at the door. Marcus hesitated, then opened it cautiously. To his immense relief and slight confusion, it was Pastor James. The pastor looked pale and shaken, clutching his hat tightly in both hands. "Marcus," he said breathlessly, "we need to talk." Ushering him inside, Marcus locked the door behind them. Evelyn emerged from the kitchen, her face etched with concern. "What's wrong?" she asked. Pastor James took a deep breath, steadying himself before speaking. "I got a call earlier today," he began, his voice trembling slightly. "From Mr. Thompson." Evelyn gasped, clutching the edge of the table for support. Marcus stiffened, his jaw tightening. "What did he want?" Marcus demanded. "He wanted to know if I'd heard anything unusual lately," Pastor James explained. "He said rumors were spreading about some kind of scandal involving him. He didn't mention you two specifically, but—" The pastor trailed off, his gaze flickering between Marcus and Evelyn. "He knows something is up, and he's starting to ask questions." A heavy silence settled over the room. Marcus felt his stomach churn. If Mr. Thompson was already sniffing around, it meant their window of opportunity was closing fast. "Did you tell him anything?" Marcus asked sharply. "Of course not," Pastor James replied, offended by the implication. "But I couldn't lie outright either. He's suspicious, Marcus, very suspicious." Evelyn sank into a chair, her face pale. "If he finds out we're behind this," she murmured, unable to finish the sentence. "We won't let that happen," Marcus said firmly, though his own fear betrayed him as his hands clenched into fists. Turning to Pastor James, he added, "Thank you for warning us. We'll be more careful moving forward." After Pastor James left, Marcus and Evelyn sat in grim silence, the reality of their situation sinking in deeper than ever. They couldn't afford any mistakes, not now when they were so close to exposing the truth. But staying hidden wasn't enough. They needed to stay one step ahead of Mr. Thompson. That meant finding ways to throw him off their trail, while Sarah worked on publishing the story. The next morning, Marcus came up with a plan. He would create diversions, small actions designed to mislead Mr. Thompson and buy them time. First, he drove to town and spread whispers among trusted neighbors about seeing strange vehicles near Mr. Thompson's property late at night. Then, he anonymously mailed copies of select documents to local officials, ensuring they reached people unlikely to be on Mr. Thompson's payroll. It was risky, but Marcus hoped these moves would force Mr. Thompson to focus his attention elsewhere, giving Sarah the breathing room she needed to finalize her investigation. Meanwhile, Evelyn focused on preparing for the worst-case scenario. She packed a small bag with essentials, clothes, food, cash, and stashed it near the back door in case they needed to flee quickly. She also wrote letters to friends and family members, explaining what had happened and asking for their support should things go south. Writing those letters was painful, a reminder of how precarious their lives had become, but it gave her a sense of control over an otherwise chaotic situation. Days passed in a blur of tension and anticipation. News of Sarah's progress trickled in sporadically through coded messages sent via Pastor James. According to Sarah, the story was nearly complete. She had verified the authenticity of the documents and interviewed several former employees of Mr. Thompson who corroborated Evelyn's claims. The final piece of the puzzle was securing photographic evidence of the ledgers themselves, a task made difficult by the need for discretion. One afternoon, as Marcus tended to the fields, he noticed a black sedan parked along the dirt road leading to his farm. His blood ran cold. The car hadn't been there earlier, and its presence felt ominous. Cautiously, he approached it, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. Inside, he found a man sitting behind the wheel, smoking a cigarette. When the stranger noticed Marcus, he rolled down the window and smirked. "You Marcus?" the man asked, his tone casual but menacing. "Yes," Marcus replied, forcing himself to remain calm despite the alarm bells ringing in his head. "Who are you?" The man chuckled darkly. "Just a friend of Mr. Thompson's. He thought I'd come by and have a little chat with you about gossip. Rumors, you know how it goes." Marcus's mind raced. This was it, the moment he'd feared. Somehow, Mr. Thompson had connected the dots and sent one of his goons to intimidate them. Summoning every ounce of courage, Marcus squared his shoulders. "There's nothing to talk about," he said evenly. "Now, unless you've got business here, I suggest you leave my property." The man studied him for a moment, then shrugged. "Suit yourself," he said, tossing the cigarette onto the ground. As he drove away, Marcus watched him disappear down the road, his heart pounding. Whatever game Mr. Thompson was playing, it was escalating, and fast. Back at the house, Marcus told Evelyn about the encounter. Her face turned ashen, but she refused to give in to despair. "We can't let him scare us," she insisted. "Not now, not when we're so close." "You're right," Marcus agreed, though his voice betrayed his unease. "But we need to be ready. For anything." That night, as they lay awake listening to the wind howl outside, Marcus realized something profound. Fear was inevitable, but surrender was not. No matter what happened next, they had chosen to fight for justice, for survival, for the hope of a better future. And though the road ahead remained uncertain, one thing was clear: they would face it together. Unbeknownst to them, Sarah was putting the finishing touches on her exposé. The article would include damning photographs of the ledgers, sworn testimonies from witnesses, and Evelyn's harrowing account of being buried alive. Once published, it would ignite a firestorm, drawing national attention to the corruption plaguing their community. But until then, Marcus and Evelyn could only wait and pray that their gamble paid off. As dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Marcus stepped onto the porch and gazed at the fields stretching out before him. For years, those fields had symbolized struggle and sacrifice. Now, they represented resilience, the unyielding spirit of two ordinary people who had dared to stand against extraordinary evil. Whatever tomorrow brought, Marcus vowed to meet it head-on, because sometimes doing the right thing means risking everything. The morning the exposé hit the newsstands, Marcus and Evelyn were huddled inside the farmhouse, their eyes glued to the small television perched on a rickety stand in the corner of the living room. They had spent the night tossing and turning, unable to sleep as they awaited the moment that would change everything or destroy them. Finally, just after sunrise, Sarah's article appeared online and quickly spread like wildfire across social media platforms. By mid-morning, it dominated headlines nationwide. Local landowner exposed, a web of corruption, greed, and attempted murder. The report was explosive. Sarah had meticulously pieced together the evidence, weaving Evelyn's story with hard facts from the ledgers and testimonies from former employees who had suffered under Mr. Thompson's tyranny. Photos of the incriminating documents accompanied the article, leaving no room for doubt about the scale of his crimes. The journalist had also included a chilling photograph of Evelyn lying in the coffin, taken by Marcus when he first discovered her alive. A haunting image that captured the brutality of what she had endured. As the story gained traction, reporters descended upon their small town, eager to dig deeper into the scandal. Neighbors whispered in disbelief, some horrified, others vindicated. For years, many had suspected Mr. Thompson of wrongdoing but lacked proof. Now the truth was undeniable, and it was ugly. Law enforcement officials launched an investigation, raiding Mr. Thompson's mansion and seizing files, computers, and financial records. Within hours, he was arrested and charged with multiple counts of fraud, conspiracy, attempted murder, and other serious offenses. For Marcus and Evelyn, watching the events unfold felt surreal. One moment, they were ordinary people struggling to survive. The next, they were at the center of a national reckoning. Yet even as relief washed over them, fear lingered. Would justice truly prevail? Or would Mr. Thompson's wealth and influence find a way to shield him once again? That afternoon, Pastor James arrived at the farmhouse, visibly shaken but smiling nonetheless. "It's done," he said, shaking Marcus's hand. "They've taken him away. He won't be coming back." Evelyn exhaled shakily, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Thank you for believing us." Pastor James nodded solemnly. "This isn't just your victory, it belongs to everyone he hurt. You two started something bigger than yourselves. But the celebration was short-lived. Later that evening, a knock at the door startled them both. When Marcus opened it, he found Deputy Harris standing on the porch, his expression grim. "We need to talk," the deputy said simply. Marcus ushered him inside, where Evelyn sat anxiously at the kitchen table. "What is it?" Marcus asked, bracing himself for bad news. Deputy Harris hesitated before speaking. "Mr. Thompson has lawyers working around the clock. They're trying to discredit the evidence, claiming it was obtained illegally, and—" He paused, glancing at Evelyn. "They're accusing you of being involved in staging this whole thing for money or revenge." Evelyn gasped, clutching the edge of the table. "That's insane. We didn't stage anything." "I know," Deputy Harris said gently. "But we need more than just the documents. We need witnesses willing to testify in court. Are you prepared to do that?" The question hung heavy in the air. Testifying meant putting themselves directly in the spotlight, risking retaliation not only from Mr. Thompson, but also from anyone loyal to him. It meant reliving every painful detail of Evelyn's ordeal and exposing their lives to public scrutiny. But it also meant ensuring that Mr. Thompson couldn't wriggle free of the consequences. After a long silence, Marcus spoke. "If it means stopping him for good, then yes. We'll testify." Evelyn nodded resolutely, though her hands trembled. "Me too." Over the following weeks, life became a whirlwind of legal proceedings, interviews, and media appearances. Sarah stayed in close contact, guiding them through the process and ensuring their voices were heard. She arranged for protective custody for Evelyn, placing her in a safe house until the trial began. Meanwhile, Marcus remained on the farm, determined to hold on to the only piece of stability he had left. The trial itself was grueling. Held in a packed courtroom, it drew spectators from all walks of life: journalists, activists, and curious townsfolk. Mr. Thompson sat stoically beside his high-powered attorneys, his demeanor unchanged, despite the mountain of evidence against him. Throughout the proceedings, Evelyn took the stand, recounting her harrowing experience in vivid detail. Her testimony moved many to tears, including members of the jury, who listened intently as she described waking up in the coffin and fleeing for her life. Marcus followed, sharing how he had stumbled upon Evelyn and uncovered the documents. His honesty and conviction resonated with the crowd, further solidifying the case against Mr. Thompson. Witness after witness corroborated their stories, painting a damning portrait of a man who had exploited, intimidated, and abused his power without remorse. Finally, after weeks of deliberation, the verdict was delivered: guilty on all charges. Gasps rippled through the courtroom as the judge sentenced Mr. Thompson to decades in prison, stripping him of his assets and ordering restitution for his victims. Cheers erupted outside the courthouse, where supporters gathered to celebrate the downfall of a tyrant. For Marcus and Evelyn, the victory was bittersweet. While justice had been served, the scars of their ordeal remained. Evelyn chose to enter witness protection, knowing that returning to her old life wasn't safe. Before leaving, she hugged Marcus tightly, thanking him one last time. "I owe you my life," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Never forget that." "You saved yourself," Marcus replied softly. "I just helped point the way." With Evelyn gone, Marcus returned to his farm, now free from debt thanks to the seizure of Mr. Thompson's properties. Yet the land no longer felt barren. Inspired by the courage he'd shown, local activists rallied to support him, helping him revitalize the soil and rebuild his livelihood. Slowly, but surely, the fields came alive again, mirroring the renewal within Marcus himself. Months later, sitting on his porch as the sun dipped below the horizon, Marcus reflected on everything that had transpired. Life had tested him in ways he never imagined, forcing him to confront fear, danger, and moral dilemmas. But through it all, he had discovered strength he didn't know he possessed, and a renewed sense of purpose. He realized that sometimes doing the right thing doesn't guarantee safety or happiness, It demands sacrifice, resilience, and faith in the face of uncertainty. And yet it is precisely those moments of courage that define us, shaping not only our destinies but also the world around us. As the stars emerged one by one in the velvet sky, Marcus smiled faintly. The road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but for the first time in years he felt hopeful. Justice had prevailed, not because it was inevitable, but because ordinary people had chosen to fight for it. And in that fight, Marcus had found something invaluable, the belief that even in the darkest times light can still break through.